Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum. We will commence in a couple of minutes, inshallah. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is going to be our second last session on how to read a book. Most of the sessions have been based on readings from Mortimer J. Adler's How to Read a Book, the updated edition, and Susan Wise Bauer's The Well-Educated Mind. So if anyone wants to read about these things in more detail, they can go back to these books. I've tried my best to summarize the essential points from there. Susan Wise Bauer, what she recommends is very, very similar to what Mortimer J. Adler recommends as well. In the first session, of course, we talked about what reading is, how, what should the mindset of a reader be, how should we approach reading, what are the different goals of reading, and of course, the final one, what the levels of reading are. By now, as students of the ALP, the Arabic Language Program, of course, I do want to contextualize everything because we're doing this for the ALP students, for you guys, in light of the ALP program. Our goal from reading Kalila wa Dimna is that we're not reading for entertainment. Rather, we will be reading either for information or for understanding. And under those two would come our pursuit for improving our Arabic language, inshallah ta'ala. So that is our goal. Number two, we need to figure out at which level we're going to read the book, and that is going to depend on our level of Arabic. So if we have mastered the elementary reading of Arabic, which means that we have gone beyond beyond functional literacy in Arabic, we have achieved essentially 10th grade literacy in the Arabic language. We're able to read a wide variety of works in Arabic. Then in that case, I will encourage those students to read Kalila wa Dimna analytically. On the other hand, those students who still feel that they're at stage 3 or stage 4 of elementary reading, then they should read with that mindset. They can still, and they should still use helpful tips from analytical reading, from what we're going to discuss in today's session. These techniques should still be used, but you're reading for more elementary purposes than for analytical purposes. And this needs to be clear if we want to gain the maximum amount of benefit that we can from the book. Now, one of the main topics of Adler's book, How to Read a Book, is analytical reading. And he goes really, really deep into it. And the majority of the book, in essence, is dedicated to that. So I'm going to present a summary, in essence, of the different stages of analytical reading. A lot of what we're going to say is going to apply to us, but some things need to be tweaked here and there. Because when it comes to analytical reading, essentially or initially, Adler focuses on works which mainly seek to convey knowledge, right? Expository works, essentially, expository works. Uh, and so a lot of the principles that he discusses initially are, it's better to say some of the principles which he discusses initially, they might not work well with stories. They would work well if you're reading Aristotelian ethics or politics, or the Prince by Machiavelli, or if you're reading Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, if you're reading a work on economics, or a philosophical treatise, or a scientific treatise, then everything of what we're going to discuss today is going to work with that. But with Kalila wa Dimna, that's not what we're doing. Yes, Kalila wa Dimna is a philosophical work in a sense. It's a work on ethics, right? Not just even in a sense, it is a work on ethics, but the way ethics are presented in Kalila wa Dimna is not really the way in which Aristotle presents ethics in Neo-Machian ethics, for example, right? It's very different. Here, ethics, morals are presented in the form of stories, right? So you will take general principles of analytical reading and you will apply them there, but you also need to tweak some things that are more related to reading stories. And what we're going to tweak exactly, that's what we're going to discuss tomorrow. Today, we want to focus on understanding what analytical reading is and what it really involves. That's our main point. There are a total of 15 rules that an analytical reader needs to follow. Those are the 15 rules which we're going to discuss today. We're going to discuss the first 8 rules in more depth. And the last ones, we're not going to discuss them in that much detail, because some of them don't in my opinion, at this stage at least, some of them don't require that detailed treatment. And generally it all comes together. It's explanatory, alhamdulillah. It's self-explanatory, alhamdulillah. So without further ado, with that introduction in mind, let's continue with our discussion on analytical reading. Now, analytical reading is what Adler would call real reading, right? This is the reading that you do for understanding. This is the reading in which you aim to go from a state of from a state of understanding less to a state of understanding more. And analytical reading, in a summary, just has 3 stages. There are 3 stages of analytical reading, and they revolve around the 4 questions which we talked about in the previous session, the 4 main questions, right? When we talked about how to be a demanding reader. There are 2 questions that deal with the structure of the book, and then 2 questions that deal with the truth and the significance of the work. Okay, so analytical reading is not just you reading a book to get some information, to just understand what the author is saying. No, by the end, you're going to be judging the book. You'll be judging the arguments which the author has made. But before you can judge, you need to first understand the book. And that's what the first 2 stages of analytical reading are for. The first stage of analytical reading is more about analyzing the structure of the book, knowing the structure of the book, okay? And this structure is going to help you move on to stage 2, where you'll be analyzing the meanings of the book. And then you'll be able to move on to stage 3, where now you yourself can analyze what the author has said, and you can give your own value judgment on that, essentially. In the first stage of analytical reading, inspectional reading is also involved, okay? In the first stage of analytical reading, inspectional reading is also involved. Now, for the first stage of analytical reading, there are a total of 4 rules. 4 rules, that's it. It's very simple. And you'll find that many readers do these things naturally, and there are many of these things that you're probably already doing if you're a reader, okay? If you read regularly, you're probably doing a lot of these things yourself. But this is going to help you organize how you do things. So the first rule of the first stage of analytical reading, which has to do with understanding the structure of the book, is classify the book according to kind and subject matter. So you need to classify the book. You need to pigeonhole the book. You need to see, where the book falls as far as the general categories and genres of books are concerned, and what the essential subject matter and theme of the book is. Okay? For example, Kalila wa Dimna, in essence, is a fable. It's a collection of fables which serve a didactic purpose, right? At times there are books which you can't really, fit in one single little category, right? They might fit in multiple categories, right? A work could be just scientific or just philosophical, or it could be both scientific and philosophical, right? So Kalila wa Dimna is a collection of stories which serve a didactic purpose. They serve or they mean to teach us ethics and morals, right? The subject matter, the main theme, right? The main theme of the works is something you also want to understand. And you also want to understand the sub-themes that come under that, okay? Now, the essential theme of Kalila wa Dimna is ethics overall, right? A lot of them would relate to political ethics, right? But many lessons go deeper than that. They go deeper into the kind of relationships that we have every day. Okay, so you'll find sub-themes of conflict and friendship and betrayal and love of leadership, and so on and so forth. You'll find those sub-themes, and then you can connect them with the larger theme of the book. So that's number 1. You classify the book according to kind and subject matter. And of course, I would like you guys to share your own thoughts as well as you will read or you finish reading Kalila wa Dimna. You would want to pigeonhole the book. You would want to mention what the main subject matter is and so on and so forth. Right now, we just have a vague idea, but we're going to have a better idea once we're done reading the whole book, page to page, cover to cover. Number 2, state what the whole book is about with the utmost brevity. So this is where now you're trying to understand the structure of the book more deeply. So at the second rule essentially wants you to, or with the second rule, Adler basically wants you to sum up the whole book in one paragraph, maybe 3-4 lines, with utmost brevity, which sort of give you the whole picture about the book, right? Now that's difficult to do, but once you've done, like, I guess even if someone has done a superficial reading of book, the activity 2 of inspectional reading, they will be able to do this, okay? Number 3, enumerate its major parts in their order and relation, and outline these parts as you have outlined the whole. So now, from the unity, you're going to go deeper into the complexity of the book. So it's like you're drawing a mind map. You have the larger idea about the book in one paragraph, but then you're going to break down the book further, chapter to chapter, point to point, right? And at this stage, you're still outlining the book. You're still outlining the book, that this is what has been. These are that's the essential point of the book, and then these are all the sub points that have been discussed under that, and the sub points under the sub points, and so on and so forth. So it's like a continuous drop down menu, a complete outline of the book. That's something that you would want to construct. And finally, define the problem or problems that the author is trying to solve. And again, from inspectional reading, activity 1 and activity 2, you'll be able to do this. You'll be able to find out what the main problems that the author is trying to solve are. Now, if you read about the history of Kalila wa Dimna, you'll know that they say that it was written, Abi Shah al-Farisi, I can't remember his name exactly. He's one of those who wrote a muqaddimah for Kalila wa Dimna. And he mentions in that muqaddimah that Baydaba, a philosopher, wrote the book Kalila wa Dimna, a sort of a non-offensive instructional manual for a tyrant ruler, right? So he wanted a tyrant ruler to fix up, and he didn't want to get hurt or to hurt anyone else in the process. So he wrote a book in which animals were the main characters, to essentially teach the tyrant ruler on how to be a good ruler. Okay, so in essence, that's the main problem that is being solved, right? But then while he's trying to solve thing to have, and other characteristics which he doesn't want him to have. Okay, so he's dealing with those individual problems as well. So you would want to outline, you would want to define the essential problem and those individual problems as well as you go along. So this stage answers the first question from the 4 questions which we talked about yesterday. What is the book about as a whole? Okay. So I've mentioned some more detailed notes on each of the points here. So rule 1, we're still talking about stage 1. Rule 1, you're classifying. Rule 1 states you must know what kind of book you are reading, and you should know this as early in the process as possible, preferably before you begin to read. So this is done through activity 1 of inspectional reading, right? If you're not going to actually read the book, and you want to figure out what kind of book you're reading, you want to pigeonhole it before you even read it, then you'll be able to do that through the systematic skimming and pre-reading, which we talked about in the previous lesson. Adler says, you must know, for instance, whether you're reading fiction, a novel, a play, an epic, a lyric, or whether it is an expository work of some sort. Almost every reader knows a work of fiction when he sees it, or so it seems, and yet this is not always easy. Is Portnoy's Complaint a novel or a psychoanalytical study? Is Naked Lunch a fiction or a tract against drug abuse? Similar to the books that used to recount the horrors of alcohol for the betterment of readers. Is Gone with the Wind a romance or a history of the South before and during the Civil War? Do Main Street and the Grapes of Wrath belong in the category? And he continues till the end, right? It's a nice passage to read and to sort of digest, because he's saying that it's not always easy to classify a book, right? And in order for you to be able to classify the book, you need to read the title, you need to read the subheadings, you'll need to read the preface, you'll need to read from different places, right? You'll need to read the starting and the ending of the book. You'll need to do everything that we talked about in systematic skimming in the previous session. And then you will be able to classify the book. Now, of course, remember that there are broad categories and then there are more specific categories. So broad categories include fiction and nonfiction. Now, Kalila wa Dimna is a fictional work, all right? Non-fictional expository works, which Adler really focused on, are those works which aim to convey knowledge. And there are essentially two main kinds of expository works. Now, this distinction is very important for students of the Sharia, for students of the Islamic sciences, right? He says there are two main kinds of expository works: practical and theoretical. And it's very important for a student of knowledge to be able to make that distinction, to distinguish theoretical works from practical works. Adler says, to make knowledge practical, we must convert it. We must convert it into rules of operation. We must pass from knowing what is the case to knowing what to do about it if we wish to get somewhere. So knowing what is the case, that's theory. Knowing what to do about it, that's practice. This can be summarized in the distinction between knowing that and knowing how. So knowing that is theory. If a work deals with knowing what the case is, if it deals with knowing that, it's a theoretical work. And knowing how to do it, that's, if a work deals with that, then it is a practical work. Theoretical books teach you that something is the case. Practical books teach you how to do something you want to do or think you should do. Okay. Now, some works have both dimensions. They have a theoretical dimension and a practical dimension. And Kalila wa Dimna has both, right? It's a moral didactic treatise, but in addition to being a practical work, it is a theoretical one as well. Because through the animals, he is trying to teach how to become a more moral and ethical person, a more moral or ethical ruler, to be more specific. But there's also theory in there. He says then how, so I mean, I've said this, however, keep in mind that this task is not always that simple. And then Adler says, for one thing, you will have to learn to mistrust him. So what we're talking about here is, of course, you're going to take help from the author himself when you're trying to classify his book, right? You're going to read his preface, his introduction, and so on and so forth. But this is your task. You need to do it yourself, okay? So you have to be suspicious in classifying books. We have noted that, so you can't always trust the title of the book. You can't always trust, so don't judge a book by its cover, basically. That's what it is. You need to mistrust the book. Only then can you classify it properly. So we have noted that although economics is primarily and usually a practical matter, there are nevertheless books on economics that are purely theoretical. So just because you see a title on economics doesn't automatically make it a practical work. Similarly, although understanding is primarily and usually a theoretical matter, there are books, most of them are terrible, that purport to teach you how to think, and so on and so forth, okay? So another thing that Adler talks about is distinguishing between scientific, philosophical, and historical works. And it's not that difficult to distinguish between them, right? Historical works are mainly narrative and chronotopic. They mention dates and places, and they narrate past events. Scientific works, Adler mentions, tend to mention observations which are beyond the ordinary daily experience of the average man. So scientific works would mention observations made in controlled laboratory settings, and so on and so forth. These types of observations, although they can be, replicated, these experiments can be replicated, but these observations are beyond the ordinary daily experience of the average man. Philosophy, on the other hand, philosophical works tend to mention observations and ideas which are within the ordinary daily experiences of the average man. Because in essence, philosophy is armchair thinking. And that's not just a derogatory way of sort of, undermining the value of philosophy. Armchair thinking can, lead to great ideas. It can lead to great things. but in essence, it's armchair thinking. So philosophers tend to mention observations and ideas which are within the ordinary daily experience of the average man. So you can use these two. You can use this distinction between the two types of observations to essentially differentiate between philosophical works and scientific works. Adler says the scientist by pointing to the results of his special experiences, the philosopher by pointing to experiences that are common to all. Now, someone might ask at this point, why do I need to bother so much with classifying a book? Just let me read it. Well, if you don't classify it, you won't be able to approach it properly. It's very important for you to classify it because the general rules of analytical reading are the same, but with specific works, you tweak things. So you don't read a philosophical work like you would read a historical work. You don't read a novel like you read a work on history. Okay, so you need to classify a book properly so that you can approach it properly as well. So rule 1 was classifying a book. Rule 2 is when you're going deeper into the structure of the book. So it's x-raying a book. You're getting to the bare bones of the book, essentially. So rule 2 says, state the unity of the whole book in a single sentence, or at most a few sentences, right? So for example, here, Adler sums up Homer's Odyssey. He says, a certain man is absent from home for many years. He is jealously watched by Poseidon and left desolate. Meanwhile, his home is in a wretched plight. Suitors are wasting his substance and plotting against his son. At length, tempest-tossed, he himself arrives. He makes certain persons acquainted with him. He attacks the suitors with his own hand and is himself preserved while he destroys them. This is like rule 2 being applied to Homer's Odyssey, essentially. This is what Adler wants you to do with every work, right? So in the first stage of analytical reading, all right? Now, Adler says that at times, so what he mentions is that at times, a detailed title can tell you all this. So there, with older books, sometimes you find that there were very detailed titles or detailed subtitles. But many times books don't have those detailed titles. So you will have to develop your own summation of the work. And even if you do find a detailed title, this is still your task. You should read a book completely based on what we discussed in superficial reading, activity 2 of inspectional reading, and then you sum up the work in such a way. Rule 3, set forth the major parts of the book and show how these are organized into a whole by being ordered to one another and to the unity of a whole. Okay, Adler says you have not grasped a complex unity if all you know about it is how it is one. You must also know how it is many, not a many that consists of a lot of separate things, but an organized many. If the parts were not organically related, the whole that they composed would not be one. Strictly speaking, there would be no whole at all, but merely a collection. He then analogizes the book as a house. He says a book is like a single house. It is a mansion having many rooms on different levels of different sizes and shapes, with different outlooks, with different uses. The rooms are independent in part. Each has its own structure and interior decoration, but they are not absolutely independent and separate. They are connected by doors and arches, by corridors and stairways, by what architects call a traffic pattern. Because they are connected, the partial function that each performs contributes its share to the usefulness of the whole house. Otherwise, the house would not be livable. A good book, like a good house, is an orderly arrangement of parts. So the third rule is closely connected with the second. You need to first figure out the unity of the book. Then you can, the unity is made from components. Once you've understood the unity, you'll now know the components of which that unity is made up of. And then you can look in a deeper way at those components and their subcomponents, and you will have an outline for the book. Adler mentions a basic formula which we can use initially. This will become a natural process after, you know, a couple of after a few tries. I wouldn't say a couple, but you know, when you do this a few times, this will become second nature. So a formula for accurately, you know, practicing rule 2, applying rule 2 and rule 3 is, he says, a formula can be stated for operating according to this third rule. It will guide you in a general way. According to the second rule, we had to say, the whole book is about so-and-so and such and such. That done. So that this is the formula for the second rule. The whole book is about this, this, and this. Once we're done with that, he says we might obey the third rule by proceeding as follows. The author accomplished this plan in 5 major parts, of which the first part is about so-and-so, the second part is about such and such, the third part is about this, the fourth part about that, and the fifth part about still another thing. The first of these major parts is divided into 3 sections, of which the first considers X, the second considers Y, the third considers Z. In the first section of the first part, the author makes 4 points, of which the first is A, the second B, the third C, the fourth D, and so on and so forth. If someone, for example, studies Ajurrumiya, they can say that Ajurrumiya essentially can be divided into 3 parts. Part 1, where the author talks about speech and the basic components of speech. Part 2, where the author talks about the manifestations of i'rab, for example. And part 3, where the author talks about the grammatical analysis of verbs, nouns, and particles. Those are the 3 parts. Then in part 1, the author defines kalam, and the author talks about ism fi'l harf, and the author mentions the signs for distinguishing between ism fi'l harf. Then in the second part, the author talks about the definition of i'rab. He mentions the definition of i'rab, and he mentions the 4 types of i'rab, and he talks about the different manifestations of i'rab. So how rafa is manifested, how nasb is manifested, and how jar is manifested, how jazm is manifested. And then the author talks about the grammatical analysis of verbs and particles and nouns. He talks about verbs first, and in there he talks about fi'l madi, fi'l amr, and then fi'l mudari'. He talks about the bina and i'rab of fi'l mudari', and then he talks about nouns. He talks about marfu'at, mansubat, majrurat. He talks about tawabi' as well. That, in essence, would be an outline of Ajurrumiya, right? Based on the basic formula, right? This structure is going to help you move on to the next stage. Rule 4, find out what the author's problems were, right? Now he says here, this is in a sense a repetition of the previous 2, but a beneficial repetition. Once you've outlined a book, naturally you've also understood which problems the author is dealing with. So, for example, the major problem that the author of Ajurrumiya is dealing with is lahan. He wants to teach you grammar so that you don't make linguistic mistakes when you're speaking or writing Arabic. All right, and then you can have individual problems as well. So how i'rab is manifested is taught in so that a person, you know, will construct sentences correctly, and he will pronounce them with the correct harakat, right, and so on and so forth. So find out what the author's problems were, right? You will be able to find that out simply based on applying or simply by applying rule 2 and rule 3. He says you should be able to state the main question that the book tries to answer, right? Like we said about Ajurrumiya, and you should be able to state the subordinate questions if the main question is complex and has many parts. And then he mentions some of the questions that can be asked about theoretical works and practical works. So for theoretical works, does something exist? What kind of thing is it? What caused it to exist? So on and so forth. practical works, what ends should be sought, what means should be chosen to a given end, what things must one do to gain a certain objective, and in what order. These are the general questions which are asked, and they can become more specific with the kind of work that you're trying to read. That, in a nutshell, is stage 1 of analytical reading. Now we're moving on to stage 2. Now, stage 1 deals with getting to know the structure of the book. Stage 2 is you building on stage 1 and you interpreting the context, the contents of the book. Now that you know the structure of the book, you want to know, the second thing that you want to know now are the contents. You want to understand the contents of the book. So stage 2 outlines 4 more rules which you're going to utilize to understand, to interpret the contents of the book. And in essence, what is emphasized here is that you need to understand words properly and sentence and understand. You need to be able to pick out which arguments the author is making, so that later in stage 3 you can pass your own value judgments on those arguments, so that by stage 3 you yourself can pass judgments on those arguments, right? But in stage 2, the main goal, of course, essentially is to be able to recognize where propositions are being made, what propositions are being made, and which arguments are being made, essentially. So the 5th overall rule, and the first rule of the 2nd stage, is come to terms with the author by interpreting his key words. And here Adler sort of draws a distinction. Just a quick audio check. Sister Sophia, you can hear me clearly?
Yes, I can.
Alhamdulillah. So come to terms with the author by interpreting his keywords. Now, Adler draws a distinction between ordinary words which are used, like words which are used in their everyday context, with their everyday meanings. Those words are not a problem to understand. But what he really wants you to do is he wants you to be able to pick out the technical terms, the words which the author is using for specific meanings, right? Now, these can be picked out in a number of ways. Some technical terms, you'll be aware of them because you've studied that subject. So you'll know technical terms used in economics, for example, technical terms. Someone who studied ulum al-shar'iyya will know technical terms used in nahu, used in usul al-hadith, used in usul al-fiqh, right? Other times, it's mainly the context which is going to help you, which is going to guide you to the meanings of those technical terms. If you're reading Fakhruddin al-Razi, al-Imam al-Ghazali, you're reading Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, oftentimes you'll find that they might be using similar language, but they mean different things. And it is the context of their works which are going to tell you what they mean when they say what they say. So first you need to understand the key words, right? Then he says, grasp the author's leading propositions by dealing with his most important sentences. Once you're done with words, you'll move on to sentences. And by understanding those sentences, you will understand the propositions that the author is going to make. Then know the author's arguments by finding them in or constructing them out of sequences of sentences. You will either be able to find the exact arguments of the author because he has stated them clearly, or you will construct them by using the sequence of propositions which the author has made. And finally, determine which of his problems the author has solved. So every author is raising some problems. Has he solved those problems? Has he solved all of them? Has he solved them partially? And which he has not. And as to the latter, decide which the author knew he had failed to solve, right? At this stage, you're still trying to understand the contents of the book itself. You're still trying to understand what the author is saying to you. You're coming to terms with the author. So rule 5, in more detail, he says, find the important words and through them come to terms with the author. So this rule has to do with understanding technical terms. Ordinary usages of words can be understood easily, but sometimes authors use certain words for specific meanings. A reader should come to terms with that. Adler says, note that this rule has two parts. The first part is to locate the important words, the words that make a difference. And the second part is to determine the meanings of these words as used with precision, right? That is very, very important, okay? He says the main point is that one word can be the vehicle for many terms, and one term can be expressed by many words. He says, let us illustrate this schematically in the following manner. The word reading has been used in many senses in the course of our discussion. Let us take 3 of these senses. By the word reading, we may mean reading to be entertained, or reading to get information, or reading to achieve understanding, right? So one word can carry multiple meanings within a text. Sometimes an author uses one word with his specific usage, and he uses that consistently throughout. Sometimes he uses one word at times for a particular meaning he's intending, and at times he's intending the ordinary meaning, the ordinary usage of the word. Okay, so that is something that you need to look out for. Adler says each of the rules of interpretive reading involve 2 steps. To get technical for a moment, we may say that these rules have a grammatical and a logical aspect. The grammatical aspect is the one that deals with words. The logical step deals with their meanings, or more precisely, with terms, so far as communication is concerned. Now, what is going to help you in finding out these words is read the passage fully, and you'll be able to figure out which words are key. Many times, the words that trouble you will be the key words. Sometimes that's not the case, but at times that can be the case. At times, the author himself will emphasize the technical words and how they use them, right? And also, knowing the subject well can help you know its technical vocabulary, okay? So this is important. Once you've figured out and located those terms, now you need to understand their meanings. You're going to do that through context. You need to figure out whether this word is used for one meaning throughout or many. It is the context that will guide you. Adler says you have to discover the meaning of a word you do not understand by using the meanings of all the other words in the context that you do understand. Okay? The context is your guide. The context is your biggest friend. What you understand is what you're going to use to understand that which you do not understand. I hope that makes sense. The surrounding words are the context for the words to be interpreted. The reader has all the materials he needs to do the job. You also need to note synonyms, different words used for the same meaning. Note the phrases as well, which the author uses. At times, he will use, different phrases to mean the same thing. Okay? That's rule 5. Rule 6, mark the most important sentences. So you're done with this, you're done with those keywords. Now you're moving on to key sentences. Through the words, you're going to understand the sentences, and the sentences carry those propositions. So mark the most important sentences in a book and discover the propositions they contain. Adler says a proposition in a book. Now, a proposition, of course, is different from a question. Questions are different, propositions are different, right? A proposition in a book is also a declaration. It is an expression of the author's judgment about something. He affirms something he thinks to be true or denies something that he judges to be false. He asserts this or that to be a fact. A proposition of this sort is a declaration of knowledge, not intentions. He says propositions are the answers to questions. They are declarations of knowledge or opinion. That is why we call sentences that express them declarative, and distinguish sentences that ask questions as interrogative. Other sentences express wishes or intentions. They may give us some knowledge of the author's purpose, but they do not convey the knowledge he is trying to expound. Okay? Now, this is a very important quote. He says, the heart of his communication lies in the major affirmations and denials he is making, and the reasons he gives for so doing. Now you want to understand the sentences more deeply, and of course you need to be able to understand them grammatically first in order for you to be able to understand their meanings. And once you're able to understand their meanings, you will be able to understand what propositions the author is making, which questions he's answering, what is he affirming, what is he denying, and so on and so forth. Once you're done with that, you're going to move on to the next step. You'll follow rule 7, locate or construct the basic arguments in the book by finding them in the connection of sentences. So now you're going to either locate the arguments if the author has mentioned them clearly, or you're going to construct the argument based on the propositions that the author has given. Okay. He says the fact that we have stated these rules in a fixed order does not, now this is very, very important, guys, right? He says the fact that we have stated these rules in a fixed order does not mean that you have to follow them in that order. Terms constitute propositions. Propositions contain terms. If you know the terms the words express, you have caught the proposition in the sentence. If you understand the proposition conveyed by a sentence, you have arrived at the terms also. So at times you might be moving top to bottom, right? At times from bottom to top. Sometimes it is the sentences. It is the propositions that will help you understand the terms, and at times the terms will help you understand the propositions. So it's a very cohesive process in that sense, right? He says, understand words so in essence, understand words to understand their meanings, and understand sentences to understand the propositions. That's the general order he has mentioned, but this order is not always maintained. All right. Now, how do you know that you have understood the proposition of the author? You need to ask yourself, are you able to state what the author has said in your own words? If you're able to do that, that means you have understood the proposition. If you're unable to do that, that means you have not understood the proposition. So he says, state in your own words. That suggests the best test we know for telling whether you have understood the proposition or propositions in the sentence. If when you're asked to explain what the author means by a particular sentence, all you can do is repeat his words with some minor alterations in their order, you had better suspect that you do not know what he means. This is a very important litmus test, guys, that you need to use when you're trying to understand books deeply. Now, we're good with that. How do we understand arguments? He says, now this is his sort of rephrasing of rule 7. Find, if you can, the paragraphs, or it might, it's a rephrasing of rule 7. So find, if you can, the paragraphs in a book that state its important arguments. Just one moment, Afwan. So find, if you can, the paragraphs of a book that state its important arguments, but if the arguments are not thus expressed, your task is to construct them by taking a sentence from this paragraph and one from that until you have gathered together the sequence of sentences that state the propositions that compose the argument. That is how you're going to understand the arguments. So after you've discovered the leading sentences, the construction of paragraphs should be relatively easy. He mentions a few ways of doing this. He says there are various ways of doing this. You can do it by actually writing out on a piece of paper the propositions that together form an argument. But usually a better way, as we have already suggested, is to put numbers in the margin together with other marks to indicate the places where the sentences occur that should be tied together in a sequence. So these are two methods. You can use whichever one you prefer to sort of knit together the propositions to understand the arguments that the author is trying to make. The final rule of stage 2, rule 8, is find out what the author's solutions are. Okay. Now, of course, every author that is writing a book is dealing with some problem and he's offering some solutions. What are those solutions, right? So Adler says you should check what you have found by addressing yourself to some further questions. Which of the problems that the author tried to solve did he succeed in solving? In the course of solving these, did he raise any new ones? Of the problems that he failed to solve, old or new, which did the author himself know he had failed on? So these are some questions that you ask to finish with stage 2. By the time you're done with stage 2, you have understood the book. You have understood the structure and the content of the book. You cannot understand the content without understanding the structure. The structure, understanding the structure is a precondition for understanding the content. Once you've done these 2 steps, now you're ready to move on to the 3rd stage of analytical reading, which is in essence, your response. Your response, okay? So here in the 3rd stage of analytical reading, Adler talks about you responding to the book, and he says rules for criticizing a book as a communication of knowledge. Your aim from reading is not just, memorizing what has been said. You want to critique. You want to accept what was mentioned, what is true. You want to accept the truth, but you also want to discuss and you also want to discuss what you think is false, right? That's how you really understand books, right? So the 3rd stage takes you to a deeper level of understanding. So first, he mentions some general maxims of intellectual etiquette, right? He says, do not begin criticism until you have completed your outline and your interpretation of the book. Do not say you agree, disagree, or suspend judgment until you can say, I understand. This is very important. Oftentimes, even in general discourse, we don't give people a chance. First, you need to understand the arguments that are being made. Only then can you agree or disagree or suspend judgment. That's the first etiquette. The second etiquette, do not agree disputatiously or contentiously. Okay? Your disagreement should have merit. Number 11, demonstrate that you recognize the difference between knowledge and mere personal opinion by presenting good reasons for any critical judgment you make. At times, an author might be mentioning just a personal opinion. And you should be able to differentiate, even with your own, you should be able to differentiate what is your mere personal opinion and what is a fact. So differentiating between knowledge and mere personal opinion is very good. And you do that by presenting good reasons for any critical judgment you make. And of course, you can also disagree with the personal opinions, with the mere personal opinions of the author. That is what you're doing in essence, right? The author could be making knowledge claims, right? And he could be completely wrong about that. You need to present your reasons if you think he's wrong, why you think he's wrong, why you think he's right. And for personal opinions as well, you need to present good reasons for any critical judgment that you make. With that, we're done with 11 rules. There are 4 more left. The last 4 deal with special criteria for points of criticism. So those are the etiquettes. Those are the 3 etiquettes that you need to keep in mind. Now, in your actual criticism, what should that material consist of? Number 1, show wherein the author is uninformed. Okay, so when you're criticizing and you believe that the author is wrong, show where he is uninformed. Show wherein the author is misinformed. So the author could be uninformed or he could be misinformed. Show wherein the author is illogical. At times, an author could be making an argument, but the argument is completely illogical. The conclusion does not follow from the premise. And number 15, show wherein the author's analysis or account is incomplete. At times, an account that the author is giving, or analysis that the author is giving, it could be incomplete. And so you need to show these things, right? Now he says at the end, he says, note, of these last four, the first three are criteria for disagreement. Failing in all of these, you must agree at least in part, although you may spend judgment on the whole in the light of the last point. So these in essence are the 15 rules of analytical reading divided into three parts. Part one, understanding the structure of the book. Part two, understanding and interpreting the content of the book. And part three, responding to the book. With these three steps, you are done with a true analytical reading of a book. At the end of his discussion on analytical reading, Adler discusses some how you can use certain materials, how you can use encyclopedias, how you can use dictionaries. So I've quoted him verbatim on what he mentioned on dictionaries because I found this beneficial, just generally and even for our purposes. And this is what we're going to end our session today with, inshallah ta'ala. Using a dictionary, okay? Now here, in essence, Adler is going to put you in the right mindset of how you should approach a dictionary, okay? He says, if we remember this, so we can derive from the fact all the rules using a dictionary intelligently. Words can be looked at in four ways. Number one, words are physical things, writable words, and speakable sounds. There must therefore be uniform ways of spelling and pronouncing them, though the uniformity is often spoiled by variations, and in any event is not as eternally important as some of your teachers may have indicated. So number one, words are physical things. Number two, words are parts of speech. Each single word plays a grammatical role in the more complicated structure of phrase or sentence. The same word can vary in different usages. For example, in common usage, when you say da'a lahu, you mean you made dua for him. When you say da'a alayhi, you mean that someone made dua against them. So all you did was change a preposition, and the meaning changed to the opposite meaning, right? So words, many times you'll be stuck at words in Kalila wa Dimna, and you'll go to the dictionary. Try to understand those words in context, right? The dictionary might mention a meaning, but that meaning might not apply to what you're reading. Maybe Ibn al-Muqaffa didn't use it like that, right? The same word can vary in different usages, shifting from one part of speech to another, especially in a non-inflected language like English. Number three, words are signs. They have meanings, not one, but many. That's also very important. There are words which have multiple meanings, right? There's a whole genre in Arabic on this, right? These meanings are related in various ways. Sometimes they shade from one into another. Sometimes a word will have two or more sets of totally unrelated meanings. So this is something that you need to be aware of. Finally, number four, words are a career in the goes through certain transformation. The history of words is given by their etymological derivation. The history of words is given by their etymological derivation from original word roots, prefixes, and suffixes, and so on and so forth. So he says a good dictionary will answer all of these four different kinds of questions about words. The art of using a dictionary consists in knowing what questions to ask about words and how to find the answers. We have suggested the questions. The dictionary itself tells you how to find the answers. So you need to ask the right questions What are you looking for exactly, right? And the dictionary is going to give you that. So he says, as such, it is a perfect self-help book because it tells you what to pay attention to and how to interpret the various abbreviations and symbols it uses in giving you the 4 varieties of information about words. Now, I've mentioned, so I've taken 3 rules of using dictionaries from Adler's book, and here are these 3 rules. These are the 3 rules which I want you to keep in mind when you use dictionaries in understanding Kalila wa Dimna. Rule number 1, you will use a dictionary according to its primary intention, as a help in reading books that might otherwise be too difficult because their vocabulary includes technical words, archaic words, literary allusions, or even familiar words used in obsolete senses. That's number 1, very important. Rule 2. So rule 1, just to sum it up, you're going to use it for the primary intention as help to understand difficult vocabulary. Rule 2, if you have to look up too many words at the beginning, you will certainly lose track of the book's unity and order. The dictionary's primary service is on those occasions when you are confronted with a technical word or with a word that is wholly new to you. Even then, we would not recommend looking up even these during your first reading of a good book, unless they seem to be important to the author's general meaning. Now, we need to tweak this slightly because Adler is saying this because he's assuming that you're reading a book which is in your first language. In the case of our reading with Kalila wa Dimna, I will suggest you not to stop unless you absolutely need to. Try to use the context as much as possible to understand the meanings, right? But if you do have to stop multiple times within a paragraph, once you have figured out the meanings of all the difficult words in the paragraph, reread that paragraph as a whole to make sense of it. Remember this is very important. Even if you have to stop multiple times within a paragraph or a sentence to search every other word, right? That's fine. At this stage, you can do that. But then, by the end of searching for the meanings of all the words, reread that sentence, reread that paragraph as a whole to make sure you have made sense of it as a whole. Rule 3, don't swallow the dictionary. Don't try to get word rich quick by memorizing a fancy list of words whose meanings are unconnected with any actual experience. In short, do not forget that the dictionary is a book about words, not about things. Words on their own have meanings, but when they're put in a sentence, that's when their true meanings come to light. And that's why I always recommend phrase mining as opposed to word mining. I keep a journal with you in which you're not just writing words. You can word mine as well, but I would emphasize phrase mining. Write down the whole phrase so that you also learn the usage of the word along with its meaning. Okay? With that, inshallah ta'ala, we're going to end this third and second last session of ours. I'm going to see you guys tomorrow, where we're going to talk about the tweaks that need to be made to some of the principles of analytical reading in our particular context. And we're going to discuss topical reading briefly. Barakallah fikum for attending. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.